when I was going through these records, I come across aerial phenomenon and little beams and things like that. And I was, I thought they were so strange. I thought these are strange reports from Catholics in 1400 and 1500 and 1800. And so I kept a log of all of these. I said, well, okay, I'm going to log this because it was a pattern that I noticed that kept repeating. And these were either interpreted as, well, these have to be souls from purgatory and they're lost and we have to pray them back into, purgatory because they don't know what they're doing kind of thing. Or we don't know what these things are.
This is Meredith for Real, the Curious Introvert, and I'm Meredith. I explore the questions people think but don't ask out loud, either because they're taboo or thanks to cultural hypnosis. My mission, and yours if you choose to accept it, is to inspire curiosity by exploring the nuance and paradox of our world. Each episode is different, so bring your ADD and your earbuds and have a look around. Hey Curiositors, it's me, Meredith. Do you just love those coulda had a V8 episodes? You know that old commercial where someone overlooks something obvious, slaps their forehead, and then says, I could have had a V8. Well, this is a V8 episode because I never saw any connection between technology, religion, and UFOs, and I thought if there was one, it would be vague. But as you'll hear, I had several V8 moments where I found myself going, oh my gosh, it's so obvious now. You'll hear how my guest even points out something that I said about aliens as a spiritual belief. My guest is a brilliant philosopher, archival researcher, and theologian, but also an ufologist who studies the intersection of technology, religion, and UFOs. I was so lucky to get her as a guest. I get asked a lot where I find guests like these, and it's different for each guest, so I started sharing where I learned about each guest in my weekly emails. If you're not getting those emails and you want to be included, you can text REAL to 66866 if you're in the US, or go to meredithforreal.com if you're elsewhere. If you're already getting my emails, you're probably one of my amazing loyal listeners. Thank you for spending time with me every week and helping to make the world a more curious place. And if you're new here, welcome. Each week is totally different than the last, but always with the mission to get curious, disrupt the algorithm, and grow into better humans. I talk with everyone from pilots to professional cuddlers. There's no specific order to listen to the episode, so just let your ADD roam free and wild. At the end of each episode, I also give a sneak peek of next week's show. And if you end up liking this episode, you'll also like the one I did with the co-founder of the debrief.org about the Pentagon's 2021 UFO disclosure report. That's episode 95. All right, enjoy the show. One summer, my dad told my Meemaw that Jesus was an alien, just to piss her off. It worked. That same day, she gave me a calculator thinking it was a computer, or as she said, a pooter. God bless those Southern Meemaws. The new technology was just as unknown to her as aliens, but not as much as Jesus. There's an unlikely relationship with religion, technology, and UFOs. They're like the power throuple that no one really talks about. No one except my next guest. She is a professor of religious history at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Her research focuses on religion, technology, but it also is research about purgatory specifically that led her to the UFO culture, a journey she documented in her book, American Cosmic. Today, she's going to help us understand the connection between tech, religion, and little gray men. Catholic ufologist, academic philosopher, investigator of secrets, Dr. Diana Walsh Pasulka. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Meredith. What an introduction.
So your mom was Jewish, your dad was Catholic. Mm-hmm. Both were non-religious, mm-hmm. But you knew at age 11 that you wanted to study religion?
Yes. Yeah. I did actually. So I had it figured out in the 6th grade that I wanted to basically do the things that priests do, in the sense of I wanted to read the Bible in the original language in which it was written at the time. Of course, I had no idea what language that was. I just knew that what I was reading, I'm sure it makes sense. but probably in its original language. And I knew it had been translated. And then I did do that. And so I guess from an early age, I knew that I was interested in this. My parents, I wouldn't say they were non-religious. I would just say that they were secularized. So my mother was secularized. And my dad he would take me to midnight mass on Christmas, and so I would go to church. Actually, when I was a kid, I made my mother take me to church, various churches, and she was cool with it. She was like, okay, I'll do that. And I would say, I want to go to this church now and this church now. And so, and I became a Christian. I became a born again Christian. And then my dad said, why don't we put you into Catholic school? Because, that's our tradition of Christianity. And at that point, I didn't understand the different denominations. And so I did. And I was actually quite impacted by the sisters there. It was the Sisters of Mercy. And they lived the life of helping people, really, and that made a huge impact on me. So, so that was my childhood in California, no less.
Wow, that is so interesting. They say that whatever you're interested in as a kid is really a great compass to follow for your adult passions. So it looks like that worked for you.
It did.
So how did studying purgatory lead you to UFO culture?
Sure. That's a great question. People want to know, wait, you study religion and you study the UFO belief system, and
right.
They don't understand. And the connections are completely weird. And I get it totally. So this is how it happened. Now you have to understand that I wasn't a believer at all in UFOs. I thought people who believed in UFOs were a little bit, like, wow, I scoffed and, that kind of thing. So this is how it happened. And it happened in late 2011, early 2012. Two things happened. First, I had finished this book on purgatory, which is a Catholic doctrine of people who it's a huge Catholic doctrine that people don't actually practice anymore. So if you talk to Catholics like over 60, they'll remember purgatory and praying for souls in purgatory. But anyone younger than that, they're not going to remember this, because the doctrine, while still a dogma of the church and a doctrine of the church, it kind of went away in the 1960s with this thing called Vatican II, which was a council of of Catholic bishops. So this is the idea in purgatory. So you have a soul, right? And that soul is not good enough to get to heaven. So it goes to this place, and this place is called purgatory, and it stays there until it's perfected and purged of sins, and then it can go to heaven. So this was a huge doctrine all throughout Europe. If you go to Catholic cathedrals, you'll see there were places for people to pray to help souls in purgatory. They pray to God and say, help my Mima or something, she had some issues and, get her
she wasn't sure about those calculators, she needed help. Right. Yeah.
Right. So, all right. So I had to go deep into the tradition. So I would go to archives. I'm, trained in archival research. Archives are really old libraries, basically, with old books in them and things like that. And so I did this research for a long time. And when I was going through these records, I come across aerial phenomenon and little beams and things like that. And I was, I thought they were so strange. I thought these are strange reports from Catholics in 1400 and 1500 and 1800. And so I kept a log of all of these. I said, well, okay, I'm going to log this, because it was a pattern that I noticed that kept repeating. And these were either interpreted as, well, these have to be souls from purgatory and they're lost and we have to pray them back into, purgatory because they don't know what they're doing, kind of thing. Or we don't know what these things are, but they might be demons, kind of thing. So, there was all these or they might be angels. So there was this interpretation that the people of the day would give those aerial phenomena. And okay, so I had this big log of things. I really didn't know what to make of them. And I included maybe one or two in my book on purgatory. And I it was in press, it was going to be published, and it was on to the next thing, because that's what professors do, right? They have to go on to the next book and research. And so before I did that, I gave this log to a friend of mine and I said, what do you think of all this stuff? And he looked it over. We were having coffee and he took some time looking through it. He looked really serious. And then he said, these look like UFOs. And I was like, what? I go, leave my office. Like, you are crazy. And it just so happened that he said, no, it looks like Steven Spielberg stuff. Like, if you looked at a Steven Spielberg movie, you'd see these kinds of things in the sky. And what happened after that, this is how it gets weird, was that there was a UFO conference in my town that I went to. And I listened to people who are experiencers. These are people who feel like they've either seen UFOs or experienced what are called close encounters with inhabitants. And they all sounded exactly like my research. And I thought, okay, yeah. So this stuff, whatever it is, it looks like it's still happening and I really have to look at it. So I thought it was going to be really easy, actually. I thought that it would be super easy just to go ahead and say, we don't generally do cross-cultural analyses, and say this phenomena is like this phenomena 400 years ago. But I thought it was close enough that we could do something like that. So I embarked on doing research, and it took me into the weirdest places that I've ever been. I mean, so I then wrote American Cosmic. I mean, now we can say who he is because he's outed himself. But some of the people in my book, this was prior to the government coming out and saying that UFOs are real, right? So that happened in June 2021. My book was released about UFOs in 2019. So my book came out prior to this. So the research I had to do, a lot of it was with people who had to be anonymous. Mm-hmm. So I gave them pseudonyms in my book. And one of those people is Dr. Gary Nolan at Stanford University. And he was working with me. We worked together on this. And I was studying how this amazing professor, he has like 4 labs at Stanford. I mean, he's like a top researcher in the world, believes in this. I was like, okay, and we went to New Mexico and went to an alleged crash site and things like that. We met Tyler, who is part of the space program, Space Force and stuff. And he's been like, he was a mission controller, and he did space shuttle mission control work almost throughout the whole program of the space shuttle when that was going. I mean, it was unbelievable to me, frankly. So that's how it happened.
It was unbelievable to me in the book too. Some of the stories that you were telling, I was really expecting your book, by the way, to be kind of highbrow. And I found it a lot more easily read than I anticipated, because you're weaving these incredible stories in throughout the discovery of your research and actually the research itself. So, thank you for that.
Sure.
So I found it funny that you said that there happened to be a UFO conference in your town when you were discovering this. And I was like, wait a minute. She wrote about that in her book. Isn't that synchronicity when you could possibly interpret events as personal providence? Did you interpret it as personal providence?
Okay, so I do have a whole section in my book where I discuss synchronicity, because synchronicity, when I started the research, I already have noticed that within religious traditions, synchronicity, if a person is doing a lot of practice like prayer or meditation, if they're Buddhist or, then synchronicities are going to happen to them. And generally they're going to interpret the synchronicities as they're on the right road, like you did, providence, right? This is, so in a sense, synchronicity is the engine of religious belief. And it happened with my purgatory book too. I interviewed people who were doing work trying to reestablish purgatory as a doctrine and practice. And they would talk about the synchronicities that they had. And so I already knew to look out for these things. But when I started my UFO research, or my research into UFO belief, I mean, it was just happening so much that I said, okay, I have to talk about synchronicity, because this is just too, it's happening so regularly. So I've taken a position on that, because what if, I don't know what it is. So I think that as a professor, I have to basically always have this agnostic position where you can identify that it's working and that it's there. But you don't actually, if you don't know what it is, you don't have to try to have a conclusion about it, because I didn't. And what I did was I offered a bunch of different theories, basically Carl Jung's theory of synchronicity, and Dave Stinnett, who was like a friend of mine and a researcher during the writing of the book. I thought he had a really great idea of synchronicity. And then Friedrich Nietzsche believe it or not, he's a philosopher. He talks about synchronicity. So, and then of course, all these people that had synchronicities. There was even this person who had a synchronicity with digital media, where so I thought, okay, this is just where it gets really strange, because a lot of people have technology synchronicities, and they're not algorithms, they're not algorithmic.
Okay. I was going to ask you about that, because I was thinking we voluntarily put listening devices in our homes, right? All of the smart speakers. Google is using algorithms to give us newsfeed headlines that support what we already believe. So it's kind of like these things could be digital providence or interpreted that way. And, the internet gods have left me a sign, I must go this direction. Yeah. So do you think that's creating a population that potentially believes everything it sees and hears? Or conversely, people are just completely agnostic and like a Pollyanna society, even like in the movie Don't Look Up?
Right. So I think that's the question we have to ask at this moment in time. And I asked that in my book, and I talk a lot about that because, and I use the work of Jacques Vallée, because Jacques Vallée actually, strangely enough, here's another strange synchronicity. He's a person who's well known for being kind of like one of the top people who looks at UFOs, right? So he's French. He lives in Silicon Valley. He's written a lot of books about UFOs. And in the 1960s, he got a PhD in information technology from Northwestern, and he worked for our military on ARPANET, which was the proto-internet. So he even talked about synchronicity with video conferencing, which was in the 70s kind of like a thing, right? Kind of like what we're doing now. And so, but he had synchronicities prior to that. And synchronicities are obviously pre-digital world, right?
Right.
Okay. So you know what he thought? He was the first one to identify that it's not the algorithms that are creating the synchronicity, because they existed prior to us being encased in this algorithmic reality. He basically said the structure of reality is algorithmic. And so our minds will put something out there, because he would do research on really strange random stuff. And then then things would come to him as like a search engine. He said, it looks like we are a search engine, or we are in a search engine, and our minds put stuff out there. And then if we do research right and identify, and we pay attention, then it comes right back. So synchronicity has a long history. In fact, if you go back to the biblical world, who is it? Augustine, one of the early church fathers, it was a series of synchronicities that had him convert to Christianity.
Interesting.
So synchronicities have been, so the question is, now synchronicities are being absolutely multiplied because of the actual algorithms that listen to us and say, so you talk to your husband or whatever, or partner, and you say, so-and-so, my 11-year-old wants Captain Crunch or something like that. And then you get 5 ads for Captain Crunch, that come at you. That's not a synchronicity. That's just a stupid algorithm. So, but there are some algorithms that are fairly sophisticated. And in fact, some of the people that I've spoken with are thinking that the UFO phenomena itself is like a sentient algorithm. In some ways,
wow.
I know it's really out there. So
that's really out there. I became so much more aware of all the theories of UFOs, and I do see how, and now that I've read your book and we've talked, and I do see how tech, religion, and UFOs are intertwined, but I think upon like first glance, those three things, you're like, that those aren't related. Maybe tech and UFOs, but the religion part, it seems unlikely. Hey, Curiositors, just a quick pause to show gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. If trash TV leaves you feeling drained and you want to support creators like yours truly, check out Stream Moco. You can search shows by your mood and even, watch my show, The Curious Introvert. For every $3.99 subscription, they give away $1 for good and support their creators, like your girl. Find my affiliate link in the episode description or the bio link in my Instagram account. Stream Moco, the streaming network that gives a damn. If you've got backyard barbecue plans for 2022, but mosquitoes are not invited, I recommend Insect. I've been using their pest control service for several years now. They have a certified mosquito identification specialist on staff, and pollinator care is always top of mind. If you live in the Florida Panhandle or the Gulf Coast of Alabama, give them a call, ensec.net. The UWF Historic Trust. We shoot the show at the Pensacola Museum of History. It not only houses exhibits of lesser-known Pensacola history, it's an event space too. So if you need a unique space in downtown Pensacola for a fundraiser, networking event, or a corporate party, take a look at historicpensacola.org. And if you want to tour one of the 12 museums, get your tickets in person so you can show the agent one of my emails and get $2 off an adult ticket. Get emails by texting REAL to 66866. Now back to the show. I wanted to ask, speaking of theories, your theory about, we'll call them interdimensional beings, aliens, etc. I had always hoped deep inside that our future relationship with, we'll call them aliens, would have like a strong sociological benefit where we would, advance emotionally and have a depletion of ego. I mean, cue the Kumbaya music, right? Do you think that when that happens, our earthly benefit will be primarily technological, or do you think there will be more of a spiritual side to it as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that this is what has been happening. So there's been, let me explain how a person who studies religion now studies the belief systems of UFOs. Okay, so in my field, we don't advocate religion, right? Some of us are religious, some of us are atheists, some of us are agnostic. So we have archaeologists, sociologists, historians. We use many different ways to look at the processes and practices that we call religion. So we're an academic field of people who do what's called religious studies. So to take this, and we don't have to say that this particular religious truth for these people is actually real, right? We just say we're going to study the social effects of this for these people and for society. So we take that lens and that framework and we apply it to this rising belief in UFOs here. And so what I was doing in my book was I was taking the rising belief in UFOs as an example of how technology has created a new form of religion. Because a lot of people, look what you just said. You just said, you would hope that we'd have a sociological benefit, right? That somehow these aliens would help us be better spiritually. Well, that's a religious or spiritual belief right there. Okay. And a lot of people believe that. So there are a lot of people who believe that those visitors, right? Whatever they are here to kind of uplift us spiritually as, ethically or better, that kind of thing, which is why your grandfather would tell Meemaw, Jesus is an alien. Okay. Because he came here. Now, another person who has this idea, but maybe not so that, it's going to be a better situation, but is Jacques Vallée. And so his idea is that this is like a control system. And he also takes this idea of aliens and he says religions work the same way, right? So they kind of like, they rely on the presence of non-human intelligent beings. Those are either God or angels or bodhisattvas, you name it, you take the religion. And these non-human intelligent beings are more advanced than us, and they give us stories and ways of being and ethical codes and that kind of thing. So it's kind of like controlling human behavior. And so he, of course, being a person who is trained in information science, then says, you see these patterns, it looks like a pattern of control. It looks like this control system type thing. So I guess, I don't know. That's my answer. I don't know. But I do know that, that religions get spun a lot of times by states and governments. And so, if you look at, in fact, I'm teaching a class right now about early Christianity, and you look at early Christianity and you see that there was nothing written during the time period that Jesus was born that we know of that has to do with Jesus, right? Except for from Romans saying there's this bunch of people that believe in this guy named Jesus. Okay. So, but Jesus that we know of didn't write anything. And we don't have any kind of firsthand knowledge about Jesus. But, 20 years later, Paul writes letters to the churches after Jesus dies, right? He's crucified. And then we have about 250 years later, we have the creation of the Bible and these biblical texts. But believe it or not, there were 100 or more texts that weren't included in the Bible that were just as authentic and, anchored other Christian belief systems and churches. So then what happened was that the Romans decided that Christianity would be the state religion. So they decided on a certain way of belief, right? So a lot of Christians don't know that either, that, in the early time period, there were as many different forms of Christianity, not as today, because today there are so many and we have a lot more people, but there were so many back then, right after Jesus was crucified. So now people have their interpretation. Same thing with aliens. So we have this military idea of what it could be. We have the ideas that we've been trained by media to believe, like the little green men or the grays and that type of thing. And then we actually have people who have experiences talking about it. And when you look at the experiences, they actually don't at all look like what the media tells us it looks like at all. So, I mean, you have these different, so how, so my suggestion then to your audience is, and in fact, I say this in my book, is whatever you see on the media about this is not really what people are experiencing. They're not experiencing like Independence Day type aliens and things like that.
I've never thought of different alien theories as like denominations. I've never made that correlation until just right now. That's so fascinating. If there's so many, if the bones of religion and the bones of alien theory and ufology are the same structure, they're made of the same stuff, why are so many people in some religious communities? I've only heard Christian communities become upset about alien theory. Why do they get upset if it's like kind of made of the same stuff?
Okay, so if you're within a belief system, another belief system might compete with yours. Okay, so what I've seen in Christianity specifically, and I see a lot of people who've had experiences of UFOs who are Christian. I live in the South, and so it's a very Christian area of the country. And so I've heard and talked to so many Christians, and it's traumatic when they have a UFO experience. It's traumatic for them. I know one person in particular who had a very, this is a man who was a successful businessman, well known in his community. He was a deacon at his church. I believe he was Baptist. And he had this experience with some of his employees. He was fishing down at the river, and they all saw some pretty incredible things, and he had experiences and things like that. And afterwards, it completely shattered him, really, and even his community. And at first, his community told him that he saw demons, right? And he wasn't really sure that he saw demons. He didn't know what he saw, right? And so he did a lot of his own research. And then he didn't talk about it for a long time. And then finally he said, I'm just going to talk about this because it was real. It really happened. And then I met him, and he said, this is what happened. And I said, yeah. I said that, that sounds about right. Yeah. And he said, and he goes, and I don't think that is incompatible with Christianity. He said, I think that this is a spiritual thing that happened to me. And he said, so I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. So he asked me questions, and I have a friend who's a priest and that was born and raised here in North Carolina. And he asked him a bunch of questions. Because this man who's a priest, he's also a professor of the New Testament. So he knows the Greek inside and out. So my friend went back, and what he did, I call it, it's something that I've found to be the case in a lot of instances, where a person who's from a different religious tradition will have a UFO experience. And they'll go back to their own tradition and reinterpret their own tradition to include these kinds of things. So then my friend would go back to the biblical text and say, Jesus coming in the clouds, what does that mean? Kind of thing. And, this kind of thing. And, and so a lot of them are also very apocalyptic. So that means that they believe that the end times are really happening. They're going to happen soon. And, yeah, so it gives them an urgency and a sense of almost trauma, So it's a pretty intense thing going on. So a lot of people don't consider it to be bad. They consider it to be a part of their religious tradition. Now, that said, there's a group called Alien Resistance, and this is a Christian group. And basically, they say if you begin to become abducted by aliens, call out the name of Jesus, and the abduction will stop. Okay. So this is another group, and they have their own, and there are also people in government who view these as, they're Christian, and they view these as the incursions of the aliens as incursions of satanic forces. So, you have all kinds of different belief systems within the structures of alien belief.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I am drawing so many connections as we're talking, because when you said the military folks, people within the military, they have their own, I don't even know what to call it, dogma. They have, their whole world and their job, understandably so, is an us them kind of thing, where there is a threat, we're here to protect. And so I could see where they would see UFOs and other interplanetary beings as a part of that context. Okay, this fits into my idea, my world. And then your friend who went fishing, he had to fit it into his world of his Southern Baptist context. So fascinating. I do want to go back to what you said about my own belief and my own hope that aliens would bring us a less asshole version of Earth. So Stephen Greer, I'm sure you're familiar with him, but he seems to have the same hope, and he holds these meditation circles where he echolocate is not the right word, but he basically echolocates where he's at to just communicate to the other beings that were peaceful. And I would love for you to weigh in on his viewpoints and his work, really.
Sure. So, okay, Stephen Greer, I know about him. I have not met him. I do have friends that have worked with him, and it's not my job to do this kind of thing, right? Interact with something that I'm not even, let's just put it this way. It's not within the field of what I would do. So our paths haven't crossed. Now, the question is, I'm just going to give you my personal opinion about whether or not aliens are going to help us be less jerky to each other. This is actually something that I consider to be fundamental to why I was interested in studying religion, frankly, is that, and I just don't understand why people don't think about this early in their lives, because I certainly did. And I'm not saying, well, yes, I'm saying people dang well should, is what I'm saying. And it's that, people are pretty cruel and there's a lot of evil, and you just have to just open your eyes and you'll see it. And, there's a lot of human trafficking, there's more slavery now than at any time in human history. A lot of those slaves are children. This is all wrong. This is all bad. And we don't treat each other well. Corporations treat people terribly. I saw all of this when I was a kid, and I thought, do we really have to live this way? Is this really how we have to live? And I thought we could actually live well. I mean, we could. We have the ability to do that. And so I thought, well, it looks like the nuns kind of have it figured out here. The sisters that they're helping, they're making the world a better place. So I thought studying religion was probably the best route. I wasn't into, hey, I want to make as much money as I can and, get as many toys before I die and that kind of thing, like a lot of people in my vicinity were doing, So this is the question. And I guess, and now that I'm a professor of religion and I was the chair of religion and philosophy for many years, and we would get people who, they're called lifelong learners. So people in their 60s and above who wanted to take courses in our department because they finally were asking these questions. And I thought, and these were professional people, right? They had very successful jobs that they had retired from. And now they were asking these big kind of questions, and they would come to my department and they'd say, we're really interested in this. And in my head, I would always think, if you had started to think about this when you were a kid, before you went to college, before you did your business, whatnot, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. That's what I was thinking. Let's start thinking about this stuff early. So I guess that's a long way to say that I don't think aliens are going to help us out. I think we're going to have to do it. And if we don't do it, that's on us.
I can't think of a better note to conclude this conversation. That is an amazing thought. It really is, because that makes it relevant. Because a question that I asked myself was, all right, what's the point of all this other than entertainment? It's so, other than it makes great chats at the bar.
Right.
I think you just nailed it. Thank you so much. Before we log off, will you tell people where to find your amazing book? Love this. Highly 10 out of 10 would recommend. Tell them where they can find this and social media.
Okay. Thank you. I do have a Twitter account at DW Pasulka and an Amazon author page. You can go there and you can see my books. And I also have a faculty page. So that's all I have time to do. I hope to get, an Instagram account and things like that, but I just haven't had time to do that. But that's what I have now.
That's perfect. Thank you again. This has been a really amazing conversation.
Thanks, Meredith, for having me on your podcast.
Thanks for listening. If you've loved a couple episodes of this show, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or the Good Pods app. And if you liked this episode, you'll also like the one I did with the co-founder of thedebrief.org about the Pentagon's 2021 UFO Disclosure Report. That's episode 95. Stay tuned next week when I talk with a cognitive science professor about the history of curse words.